Hello and welcome to Cherry Red TV. Today our guest in the studio is Steve Beatty from Plastic Head Records, and we're going to find out a lot more about Steve himself and of course about Plastic Head. So hi Steve.
Hello.
So let's start with you and when you were a kid and music. When did you first start to get interested in music?
I think probably when punk happened when I was about 9 or 10, and my sister actually got me a TDK cassette of the Stranglers' first album.
So it was a bootleg, was it?
Yeah, home taping, yeah. And, but it was, being 9 years old, I obviously didn't have a lot of disposable income. I don't even think I had a record player at the time. I'd let alone a cassette player, actually. But she got me this cassette of the Stranglers' first album, and I just totally fell in love with it, really.
Right.
And from that moment onwards, I was, to be honest, I was totally hooked. And it's a band that's kind of, I still buy the records today, still go and see them, and still admire them. So my favourite band of all time, I guess.
You were a 9-year-old punk, were you?
I was, yes, yeah. In Glasgow, in Scotland, yeah.
Yeah. Are you living in Scotland at the time?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
You don't sound very Scottish, you see.
I've been here for 32 years now.
Right, yeah.
And as my mother said, we're still improving the breed.
Right. And so what happened next? Did you start to play in a band at some point?
Well, we moved down to England, I think, when I was about 11 or 12. And then I kind of joined a local, kind of couple of guys that were into punk probably by the time I was about 12 or 13. And I was kind of a drummer, but I was actually drumming on plastic tubs at the time because I didn't have enough money for a drum kit, and rehearsing
right, really?
in my mate's bedroom because that was the only place. Yeah. And it was kind of that was when I was about 12, 13 kind of thing, and then kind of got a bit more serious. I managed to get a drum kit, but I think it was about the time about 14, 15, and you kind of borrowed the school's one. And the band was called the Psychads. I have no idea what it means, and I have no idea whatever happened to the other guys in the band. And but from that, I think that, and then the initial punk explosion happened, and we were playing in a band and everything down in England, and still into the old school bands like the Stranglers and the Clash, etc., the Ruts, etc. I then kind of hit, I guess, probably about 15, 16, and the anarchist movement kind of came around, and because I suppose I was, getting to the age where I had some money coming in and buy odd jobs and stuff I was doing and wherever else, and kind of being able to go out to gigs and everything. I think that was the real deal for me. That was my period, really. And it kind of the whole DIY ethic of the whole thing I was totally taken with, absolutely taken with. I thought it was absolutely brilliant that, that I think bands like Crass' everlasting legacy will be that they actually showed especially to the independent music industry, was that they showed people like me that, hey, you don't have to sign to a major record company, you can do this in your bedroom. And that was a huge influence, I think. If you look at all the other guys from the punk period, yourself probably included, it was all that came from there. And I think that was a great thing about that. And I started my label Endangered Music, which was started off just doing tapes and a fanzine and selling them at gigs, etc. And then I got saved up enough money after working at the building site when I left school to release the first single, which was the Fiend standalone EP in 1985.
So how old were you when you left school?
Well, about 15. But I left by mutual consent. They didn't want me and I didn't want them. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really. I think part of the whole rebellious thing about punk, I suppose, was I just hated school. And I pretty much hated school from when I was about 5 years old right through to it. So
yeah.
I never completed school or finished any
exams. But you must have learned
anything.
certain things at school, didn't you?
Yeah, I learned how to hate authority. Absolutely hate authority. And I didn't like the whole thing about it. I mean, I think a huge part of me doing what I'm doing now was I actually absolutely detested the data raid drudgery of going to somewhere that I absolutely hated going to with a load of people I didn't want to be there with, being told what to do by people I didn't think had the right to do that. And I think I had a lot to do with my kind of rebellious spirit anyway, and the whole punk thing. And so, I couldn't wait to get out of school. And I think once my parents had kind of realised that I wasn't going to... My brother and sister are academics, and I think my mum and dad kind of realised that I wasn't going down that path, and they kind of just went, OK, just let's get you out of there as quick as we can and stop the agony. So, and I was forever in trouble at school, so I was never a quiet kid.
You weren't an ideal student.
I was not an ideal student. I was an A student. I was absent.
Anyway, so you started this label called Endangered Music, yeah?
Endangered Music, yeah.
And what kind of things did you put out?
I put out the Criminal Justice Hierarchy of Hell EP. They were a punk band from Huddersfield. And they actually had a documentary made about them on BBC Two, which was called Made in Huddersfield. And it was this appalling TV show of this punk band living in Huddersfield, and the whole thing about punk and that. And it was, but they had a BBC Two arena thing. It was quite embarrassing, but good fun anyway. as all things like the BBC when they make a documentary about those things are. But we did an EP with them. I did the Fiend standalone EP.
Right.
Which, I mean, the label had a good rep for quality because all the reviews in magazines like Max and Rock and Roll, etc., always kind of said what fantastic stuff I was putting out. But it was...
So you were financing this from your building...
Well, working on the building site and working at Bowier's Pie Shop, the pie factory in Whitney, where my mum kind of like... There was basically some summer work, and my brother worked there when he was at college when he came back, and it was... I was totally unskilled and had no education, so, it was basically like... the only way I could get money was doing manual labour jobs, so that was...
Right.
So I was 16, just trying to. I mean, I was doing things like a paper round before that. I was doing window cleaning round, and I did. I just worked on the building sites. My next door neighbour had a building company, so I was kind of doing a bit in the summer anyway. And it was the only way to get money because my mum and dad didn't have any money, so that was. It was like working was the only route to get funds.
Yeah. So you were working hard to support.
Yeah, I mean, I was literally. I mean, when everybody was kind of out and wondering why I was never out, I was. I was always saying to them, "Well, I'm saving up to put a record out." And to be honest, the only thing that kept me going doing those jobs was the fact that I was saving up to finance my label. I mean, that was my shining light.
And how did you actually organise things like the distribution of the label?
Well, it basically just came from kind of selling stuff at gigs, and when I was going to like gigs in the early '80s and the late '70s, probably, saw the Damned at the fifth anniversary show, and there was people outside selling fanzines, and it was like, maybe that's the route to just stand there and say, does anybody want to buy something? It seemed the obvious way to do that, and so that was kind of it. So I literally used to just stand outside gigs with either demo tapes and fanzines or 7-inch singles, and just kind of say, did anybody want one? And generally get the bus or hitch to gigs. That was my distribution methods were primitive to say the least. But then again, with the whole anarchist punk thing, the whole movement was all mail order based, and other people were setting up what was called distros, which was they would just sell at gigs or they would sell mail order themselves. So, and again, that was kind of, I think that was a very early thing that inspired me to kind of get Plastic Head together later on, was the fact that all you got to do is phone up someone or stand outside a gig and you can sell them, and it doesn't really matter how you sell them as long as it was sold. Which is quite unusual, really, to kind of think of the ethics of it all, really, when the anarchist punk movement, got some very successful capitalists. It was quite unique, really, but that was how it was done. So there wasn't, that was the established order. So.
When we were talking on the phone yesterday about what I was going to ask you in this programme, you were saying that you also had a mail order business, and what you would do was hitchhike to gigs with your boxes of things you were going to sell.
Yeah, bags of it, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you would do that. I mean, and when, a friend of mine, John, he had a car, so we would, I would pay him some petrol money, and he would go and see the gig. I would phone up the venue and say, can we have a stand or a stall or something, and just set it up, and, I remember once it was like the most amount of money I'd ever seen in my life. We did a punk festival in Birmingham, and I took something like £800 that day, and it was just like the most amazing thing. And it was like, oh my God, And I got home and I said to my mum, because I'm still living at home at the time, I said, yeah, we did 800 quid today, and she was like, you did what? And it was like, oh my God, this is because I think my mum and dad, to their credit, were very supportive of me. I mean, I think they kind of thought like, well, he's the black sheep of the family, and he's doing what he's doing, and he's a punk kid, and he likes to play drums in a punk band. But I think for all of that, I was always very politically motivated. I had strong ideas about how very aligned with the punk movement at the time, and I don't think for one second my mum and dad ever thought it was a joke. I really do, to their credit, think that they thought that's what he wants to do, and he's going to build a business out of this. And he seemed, because it wasn't like something that lasted a month. This was going on 3 or 4 years now. It's ever since I was got involved in music, and I was playing in bands and going to gigs and selling stuff and getting the label together. And so it just kind of kept on moving in that direction, really.
And did you see where it could go in the future?
I had no idea.
Did you have ambition as such at that time, or was it just something?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, I think I just wanted it to, I wanted to be successful. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, and I think it's something that anybody that's ever run an independent record label probably feels, that you're hugely passionate about what you do, and it's the only thing you want to do. I mean, the only thing I wanted to kind of do, probably, well, I'm 42 now, so I think the only thing I can't think of much stuff better to talk about than sitting around talking about music or listening to records or talking, or sitting down looking at sleeves and admiring people's artwork and listening to all the things that are contained in there. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it was all encompassing all the time. So I mean, I went on the end because I was unemployed for a while, and I was getting £16.50 a week from the DSS, and I was paying my mum £10 a week for keep, and I would get £6.50. And some weeks that £6.50 literally went on postage.
Yeah.
You know, that was to post out or get my flyers printed or whatever it was, and I was, you know, borrowing and photocopying anywhere I could get it from friends at work or whatever else, you know, or the school or whatever, where else I could get free photocopying to make up the catalogues, you know. And I was writing to other bands all the time, and other distros like mine, and we would all sell each other's stuff. So, you know, there was all kind of like there was a network out there, and it was all forming at the time with the anarchist punk movement. So, and as I said, I think, you know, I mean, I remember when I released the Anti-Sex 7-inch single. I remember working at Bowier's, and of course it was all like ethically like £1.10 or less for a 7-inch EP. And I'd got distribution through what's now Vital PS, which was a company called Revolver, which was part of the Cartel, it was part of the Bristol. So, and by that time I was working with other bands, like local bands who we wanted to figure out how to put a record out, so I would help them put a record out, you know, and I would get involved in it, and, you know, and I would sell it through my distro at gigs, etc. And I remember when I contacted Revolver and got a distribution deal with them, and I remember releasing the Anti-Sect EP, and I was still working at Bowie's at the time in my summer job. And which was pretty much hell for a vegetarian working at a meatpacking place, but it was the only place I could get any work. And I remember it actually going out, and I remember getting Sounds on Tuesday afternoon or wherever it came out. And I looked at the indie chart, and it said Anti-Sect was the highest entry in the independent chart that week at 7, kicking out New Order's Blue Monday. So of course I automatically assumed I was rich, and I could pack in work. So I literally, you know, went down dutifully, walked back down to work and told them to stick their job.
Really, you resigned because
literally
you
just
saw it.
I walked out, just said, I ain't working here anymore. My record label's fine. So I zipped out, and I should have done my maths better because I lost 2 pence on every record I sold because they're all £1.10 and everything. But I think once I kind of got it oddly enough it was, and I had a few other building jobs here and there, you know, carrying on when I needed money. But I think that pivotal moment showed me that it could be something. You know, I thought, this isn't a joke anymore. This isn't just trying to this. I just achieved something to me. And
Must be quite proud, absolutely.
For an 18-year-old, I had this record label, and it was number 7 in the independent chart when the independent chart still meant something. And I had, you know, and that actually the record actually came across from. I mean, Anti-Sect were one of my favourite anarchist bands, and I'd actually met them when they played Cowley Road with Conflict at the Cop Hall. And just got chatting to one of the band in the bar, and, you know, I was like, you know, kind of a bit rock star, I suppose, being a young man. I was like, oh, that's the guy from Anti-Sect. I was like, oh, hi, how are you getting on and everything? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, I was selling my singles. And he said, oh, we really want to put out a 7-inch. Would you be up for doing it? And I said, yeah. It'd be absolutely brilliant. And he said, oh, we'll record it on our own money. And, you know, and I didn't have any money to put it out. So that's when I contacted Revolver and said, I've got the Anti-Sect EP. You know, Anti-Sect are a big established band. Would you give me the money to press it? And they said, oh, we'll give you a manufacturing deal. And so, you know, so I got the manufacturing deal with Revolver, and then they had all my other stuff going through there, and that's Endangered Music, really. But Endangered Music, oddly enough, didn't last that long, because it took like 4 or 5 years to do 5 or 6, 7-inch singles, because, you know, obviously I didn't have the money to do it, you know, just whack out records all the time. So I actually only ever put out 2 albums. One was HDQ, the other one was AOA, Satisfactory Arrangement Album, and about 5 or 6 7-inch singles. And 2 of them 7-inch singles were actually financed by the bands that were on it, because we did compilation EPs. So there are 5 or 6 bands on an EP, and we would all pay a bit of money to get the record together, because we couldn't get record deals or anything. And I was playing an anarchist band at that time called Stone the Crows. And so we couldn't afford to get our own record out or anything. So we all just chipped in and kind of, you know, £150 each, which was a lot even then between the 4 of us. And we would put out the 7-inch single. Everybody would get their own copies to sell at gigs, and that was kind of that. So the label really didn't last that long.
So you were always playing in bands, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm still playing in a band now. I think I've only ever had 2 or 3 years off playing in a band at any one time.
And you still play drums?
No, I play bass now, actually, because playing drums is far too much like hard work. So I play bass guitar.
Well, you look pretty fit, though.
In a band called Octoberfall. So.
Okay. So, what I didn't realise was you didn't actually start Plastic Head itself. Plastic Head Records was going, and you met up with the guy who'd started it, and you started working together. Yeah,
well, it actually came about because Anti-Sect actually phoned me up one night and said, you know, we want to come and see you. And I was babysitting with my girlfriend at the time, and they actually sounded quite annoyed about something. And my mum kind of phoned me up and said, oh, there's Anti-Sect to be on the phone, can you give them a call back? So I phoned them from where I was.
Right.
And said they wanted to come down and see me. So I said, well, you're only in Northampton, get in the car and come down. So they came down, they all looked really annoyed, actually. And they had these 3 great big anarchist punks in my mum and dad's house. And I was kind of saying, well, you know, what's up? And they said, well, you know, we've not received any royalty statements. And to be frank, I actually, at that time didn't have a clue what that was, And I kind of said, well, I thought I was just going to give you some singles and that was it. And they were saying, no, we were expecting a royalty statement and we haven't received any mechanicals. And I said, what's mechanicals?
You were quite innocent at the time,
Well, I
weren't
was
you?
totally clueless, to be honest. I don't know about innocent, but I was just stood, kind of. I don't know what it was. So I said, well, I'll kind of look into all of this and kind of sort it all out. Basically, I didn't kind of know what. I was quite intimidated at the time and very disappointed in them, I suppose, because I thought, we were just, people just putting out some records and that was it. And all of a sudden, this kind of admired anarchist punk band that I had was kind of like going, well, where's my cash? I can understand it all now, but at the time I didn't. So. Yeah. I got this Music Week directory from somewhere that someone had given me, and I just looked for a publisher because I had no idea how to do any publishing stuff. So I phoned up Plastic Head Publishing, which was a guy that lived in Berwick-sur-Lomme near Wallingford called John Hyde, and he literally was just local. So I thought, well, phone the local guy, right? So we met up in Oxford. I got the bus up to Oxford and met up in Oxford, and kind of I said to him what I was doing, and his label was basically he was doing library music, which was music for. Background TV stuff.
A very different world.
Yeah, totally different world. And he was running this label called Plastic End Records, which was basically rubbish. He put out a few local bands, and nothing was doing very well anymore. It was pretty much rubbish, but he did actually have the claim to fame of doing the Weatherman song. I wish I was like Michael Fish,
right.
And that was actually by two local girls that lived locally to him. But anyway, I digress. I went out to Oxford to meet him and kind of said, well, what's publishing? How do you do this? We got chatting about what each other did. And it kind of made sense to get together because his label was a disaster, but he was distributed via Bax, I think, at the time. And he wasn't doing anything, and he was kind of, I think he met this young man who was kind of ambitious and had lots of energy, and I was, let's put out some records and let's get together, and had all these great plans. So we got together, and for I think about 2 years, and pretty much quickly in that time, I'd left home. I was about 19 at the time. I'd left home, moved over to Berwick-sur-Lomme near where John lived, rented out a small office because we had enough between us to kind of just about pay for a very, very cheap office. And I kind of quickly, because I had access to a phone finally and a photocopier and everything, kind of got to work and started, selling records anywhere I could. Started buying from other labels, and I had the mail order, so I was kind of putting all this into there. And John, I don't think, John never signed up for it to be a successful company. I think he liked the idea of doing what he was doing. And I had different plans, really. I think by that time I was very serious about engaging music forward, and Plastic Head came into it. So I started figuring out a lot of stuff, and it all started getting explained to me. So I was quickly moving. I was progressing quickly. And John, after about a year and a half, I think, just kind of decided that it wasn't where he wanted to be, and it was where I definitely wanted to be. And by that time, I'd kind of started contacting a lot of other people that I knew, and we were in a position to kind of press other label stuff for them. And I was finding export partners, and I literally was. I mean, he had a lot of credit to John. I mean, he did connect me with a lot of people, and all of a sudden, I was finding out, that there was people who bought records and even paid for them, and there was export companies like Caroline International and stuff that I'd never sold to, and all of a sudden, they would turn around and say, "Hey, we need 3,500 copies of one of your 7 inches," and I was screaming going, "What?" So it came together really, really quickly, and John and I decided to part ways. Oh, very friendly. He just decided it wasn't for him, and I decided it was how I wanted to earn my living, and because we were selling other people's stuff, and there was the big thing at the time was we were through. I think we were through APT. We had some stuff through APT, and I was playing in a band called Mass at the time, which was a big John Peel favourite. We did a Peel session in lots of touring bands like Tad, etc. And John Peel was playing our single To Hell, and it was on a small American label. And I said to this small American label, it's done with this good demand. I'll release it here. And I think we sold 10,000 7-inch singles, which was just mad. And I was doing it by I got quite annoyed with APT because I don't think. They did not take me seriously. I think they just thought I was some annoying kid trying to run a record label, and I never got paid on time. My label manager was kind of quite very dismissive of me and everything. I just kind of, if you're not interested, then you're not interested. So I started phoning up a lot of independent shops with all the stuff I had with my mail order, because I'd now discovered they were there, and it was perfectly easy. What you did was you phoned up, you asked them if they wanted to buy some stuff, and then you sent it to them, put in an invoice and they sent you a check, which obviously sounds quite easy now, but it certainly wasn't to an ignorant, a naive young man. So, my band's single. I managed to sell tons of these singles to all these shops and started offering them everything else. And I kind of phoned up APT and said, I think we should just part ways. And I spoke to a guy there called Pete Thompson, who's now the head of PS. And he said, I said, no, I just want out of our deal and I want to get on and do my own thing. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to start up a distribution company. So he laughed at me and put the phone down. I thought, well, that's a nice way to end that. And then, I think that gave me extra stimulus, definitely I thought from this point onwards, I just thought really that Britain needed me in the distribution market and I needed it and I was going to get about. And I all by that time had 70 to 80 shops I was selling to, so the turnover was was quickly going upward all the time.
And you were working from where at that time?
I was working out of a garage in a place called UL, which is next to RAF Benson.
Very beautiful place, yeah.
It's called Atlanta Garage, and it's and our old landlord there, Brian Bull, was a really nice guy and helped me actually learn bookkeeping.
Yeah, so you really learnt all this stuff as you went along, didn't you?
Yeah, totally, yeah. Well, it was just literally seeing what everybody else was doing and kind of literally just figuring out how I went along. I think that's the other thing. There is no school for any of this, and there's no school for any job. What you really have to do is you have to go and discover it for yourself, and you have to go and experience it. And that's when people say to other people, that they're going to come in for a job, have you any experience? And that was, unfortunately, I had to find everything out for myself, and it would have been great to go and work for another label. And kind of figure out. But then again, I did it my way, and I did it the way I wanted to do it. So,
okay, so you're in the garage in Ewell, and you were buying off labels, and then
selling on.
Yeah, and there must have been the point where you decided to take it up a notch and think, right, I'm really going to have a go at building it to a bigger level.
Well, no, I think I was well on the path to that at the time because I had a friend of mine who. Was, as I said, I was in the band called Mass, and we'd signed, by that time the band had signed to a label called Abstract Records, which was run by a guy called Edward Christie, as you well know.
Yes.
And I was we were sharing a house with him. I wasn't living with him in that sense, but we were sharing a house together, and it was Dave Ellesmere, who was Bambi from Discharge. He played drums on the YEP, and he was our sound man in Mass. And I was, was literally struggling along with Plastic Head on my own by that time. And Dave said, well, why don't we just, I'll come up and we'll get a place together and I'll help you out. So he came up and he, kind of come into the company. And then I literally was, I think the main, and I think knowing Edward helped a lot because, we were kind of selling our own, I was helping him sell Abstract by that time.
He was just to give the history on Edward, he actually had been involved with Gem Records. And he was the A&R man, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He signed the UK subs, I remember there.
And Samson, I believe, as well.
I think he did, that's
Samson,
right, yeah. And Jem had a few hits and were quite successful. So he knew how a real record company worked with all.
Well, I actually met Edward through John Hyde. And when we visited Edward one afternoon in London, I said to him, I was looking at the catalogue that he had. And I noticed that he had Bad Brains Eye for Eye on vinyl. And I said, I think I can sell a lot of this. And he very, very sarcastically said to me, what, 20? And then carried on talking to John. And I said, well, I'll go and see how many I can get orders for and I'll come back to you. So I came back with an order later of 500 for him a week later. And all of a sudden, he was
pretty impressed,
I was his new best friend. But he was kind of cool, but, and I started, we obviously started selling records for Abstract and that's how he got to know my band, etc.
Yeah.
But I think the real point of it was when I met my business partner Elaine, who we've been business partners for now 21 years.
Right.
And she was working as a waitress in the local pub, and she used to work at Island Records. She used to look after people like U2 and stuff when they were in town. And but she worked at Island, and then she got married. It all life had gone wrong, and she'd come back to the area around Benson, UL, and Wallingford, where we're based now, to live with her parents for a while. And I just got talking to her basically in the pub because I used to go to the pub for my lunch because I remember they used to do a $1.99 fish and chip deal, and we just got chatting and I was kind of feeling at the time that there's a big step, the next step. I don't know how to do it really. It's VAT returns and maybe computers and stuff and and we got talking and she said, look, I'm at a loose end. I'm just doing this at the moment, and could you give me a job? I said, well, I haven't got any money to pay you. I said, the most I can afford probably to pay you is £20 a day cash in hand. So she said, that'll do.
Yeah.
So she came up the next day and had a look at how we were doing the books, and it literally was. I had this, the blue jotter thing, the blotting paper. You would write and you would keep the copy underneath, and that was my invoicing book, and I would write them out by hand or. So we invested in. She came up and said, "Look, let's get some office stuff like a typewriter and stuff like this," and she kind of started putting the administration end together, and we started getting really organised, and upstairs the attic was spare in Atlanta House, so we said to our landlord Brian Ball, "Could we rent the attic from you?" And that was our first ever warehouse, and it was a room no bigger than this, but it was enough room to stock things in.
And it was basically anarcho punk and some metal.
I think by that time it was and metal, a lot of metal.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of the metal scene was really happening, and if you were an anarchist punk and you were discovering bands like Venom and the first extreme metal bands before a lot of the metal scene had, because the punk scene seemed to like things like Venom and Slayer, where the metal crowd it was too extreme for them. So that was happening, and a guy I knew in Germany. Who runs an extremely successful record label called Nuclear Blast Records. I think there's 78 people work at his label now, and he's one of the biggest mail orders in Germany. And I knew Marcus, and he was very much a version of me in Germany, but hugely more successful. And he'd started up Nuclear Blast, and he was our first ever signing as a label for distribution.
Right. That was a good one to have as a starter.
And he'd done 5 or 6 records by that time, which was some American hardcore stuff. Which again, the American hardcore scene was just coming into Britain, and the British punk scene was definitely dying away, and the new American thing was overtaking that.
So Steve, you saw a niche for yourself that other distributors weren't covering well. Is that how you looked at it?
I think the annoying thing I found about when I was dealing with APT and Bax, for instance, was that they seemed to totally stick their nose down at extreme metal and the punk scene. I think they were kind of very and it's something I think that followed on from what I've done at Plastic Head. I mean, if a label comes to me, I don't cherry pick what they do, and I don't interfere with what they do. As far as I'm concerned, it's their record label, and I'm there to do my job as a distributor. And I think a lot of people back in those days seemed to have a lot of opinion on what a label did, and to my mind, I could never figure out why they just couldn't just get on with selling my records, and they would have to interfere in what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that I loved the punk stuff, and I was totally passionate about it, and I really loved the early extreme metal stuff. I found that really exciting. The new wave of American hardcore stuff was just wow. It was just bands like Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys had started it, but the second wave was like the second wave of British punk was far more interesting to me. I think it was because of the age I was at. It was I was able to get the information, interpret the information better, and but all of that I was just kind of totally excited by all of that, and they didn't seem to be interested in that. So I think from very early on we decided to be a specialist in that area. But that's where my passion lay. So I was totally interested in that. So.
And were you doing the selling to the shops yourself? How did that work?
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And doing all the warehousing from our attic, which was really annoying that you'd have to carry them all upstairs and then all back down again.
So there's no lift there?
Oh no, literally we had to carry them up a wooden staircase.
Yeah.
And the shelving was, our landlord and me put it in ourselves with, with some nails and some wood, and got up with a saw and kind of just figured it out. So.
And there was just you and Elaine pretty much working there to start with?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And Dave Ellesmere.
Yeah.
And then we had, and then Tim Chilton came on board, and he was a local lad, totally into his metal, and he applied. He knew Elaine and said, "Is there any work going with us?" Because he lost his job at a local place. He'd been made redundant. I mean, we were all 18, 19, 20 at the time. And then Tim came in, and Tim's been with me ever since, and he's now risen to being the poodle-haired heavy metal kid that was upstairs all day long wearing Godflesh and Exodus t-shirts to be our sales manager. And I mean, I think been working with Tim and Elaine all my adult life, and it's been an honour and a pleasure, I have to say. It's been fantastic working with those two.
So just take us through the various stages of Plastic Head, because you've been going, is it 20 years now you've been going? So just say, we're obviously talking about the beginning then. It's always interesting to hear about how things begin.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people watching this programme will enjoy hearing about that. But just take us through the next level. What happened next in your next kind of big jump, so to speak?
Well, as I said before, I think when Elaine came on board, there was, I kind of felt we had this solid rock of a company that someone could run the administration side while I got about doing everything else. And Elaine was totally into that, and she loved doing it, and we got on brilliantly. We worked really well together, became very good friends very quickly, and we had our attic in Avtech House, and then the next day, I mean, business was going okay. There was 3 or 4 of us there at that time. We'd started doing T-shirts, and that was a good thing for us. And again, no one was doing any of the punk bands T-shirts, so we started to do that. And we attracted more and more labels and more customers all the time. And
see, what the challenge is, which I'm intrigued how you handle this, a lot of businesses, especially distributors, they do okay when they start, when it's just a couple of people, and then they get successful, expand, and the cash flow goes through the roof, and they get in a real mess. But that hasn't happened to you, has it?
Well, I think whatever we lacked on that side of it, there was no end of personal fear for me, I have to say, because I mean I felt that as much as all this was exciting, it was completely daunting at the same time, and I was probably actually quite, looks kind of back now, but I was quite a shy young man really at the time, and where we were going, I think for a good 4 or 5 years I felt totally out of control, but just kind of, I don't know what to do. But the fact that we had Elaine and Tim, and it wasn't just people working together, we were real family for each other, that you felt safe going on with that. So we'd had our garage in Atlanta House in New Elm, and the next stage is that Elaine knew a local landlord who owned a business estate, and there was a cheap deal coming up on a warehouse. And I went down to see this warehouse with Elaine, and I stood there like, how can we afford this? Oh my God, how can we possibly afford this place? And it was something like 1,500 square foot. I think my current office is bigger than our first warehouse. And but we moved in, and again we ripped out the racking and installed new wooden racking and got on with it. And it just seemed that day by day as every day was something new. There was no doubt about that.
But was it Elaine that worked out some kind of basic cash flow to assure you that you could afford the warehouse?
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at what we were earning every month. I mean, I think by that time, although the invoices were being typed up, nothing was computerised. I mean, we would literally back in those days, even up till a good couple of years when we moved into the first warehouse, we would get all the invoices out at the end of the month, and we would count up what we sold, and then we would write out the statements by hand. Yes. And that was the only way to do it. There wasn't. It was right on the cusp of the age of computing. So I mean, I think we got our first ever word processors, and it literally looked like the tennis game you used to get. That was how up to date it was, and there wasn't any other way of doing it. And I think even at that time, a couple of years before, when I was still getting statements from people like Baxter APT, they were still handwritten or hand typed. There weren't, there wasn't any technology to do that. So it was all pretty primitive. That's for sure. But I said we'd kind of figured out we were earning this amount. We were earning a living out of it at the time. It wasn't a lot, but it was a bit of a living, and that was to me was fantastic. Although my rent was cheap because I was living in the office on the sofa bed, and so was Dave.
Really? Yeah.
And any time I was between houses or couldn't afford the rent, we just bailed out of it and just lived in the office because I didn't see any point in paying 2 rents. And I mean, Elaine would walk in some mornings, and Dave and I would be covered in T-shirts with beer bottles on the floor. That was right in the early days, but it was all good fun. But we moved into Bushell's business estate, which was the 1,500 square foot warehouse.
Yes.
We'd worked out we could afford it. It would be hard, but we could afford it. But we needed to move because we were storing records in the hallway by that time outside, and my desk was actually made out of vinyl for a while because I just had an old door and some vinyl, because if we needed it, we could just move the desk out. And it all sounds quite ridiculous, but it's all quite true. But it was we moved into that, and then and it just got, from that point onwards really we'd started to do something good. We had a good steady turnover. We were growing all the time. Month by month, we would get a new warehouse guy in, or a new something to do that, and we were finding out ways of doing it. And it's like, as you said, it's the first 4 or 5 years of any business, you were just going like this. And we did it at quite an accelerated pace because there seemed to be an awful lot of demand for what we were selling, and we had a good network to do it. And by that time, we weren't even dealing with people like. I think we were just about dealing with HMV, but only for T-shirts. We weren't selling them any audio. They didn't want to open an account with us to do that yet. And we were just about selling to Virgin, and our price. We just about started with them, and it really was kind of pitiful because you would get an order from Selector Disc in Nottingham. It was £500-600, which is a good order, and then you get an order for 3 CDs from our price in Leicester, and it was that was pretty painful. And I think that was the hard part. Is when we kind of made that jump from being a small independent to starting to dealing with the bigger companies, that what we had to install to deal with those bigger companies was mind-boggling for us.
No.
It was all of a sudden, it was a lot more complicated than just throwing it in a box with a delivery note and whacking it out. And you spoke to Ben or Simon or something on a Friday, and he was like, "All right, mate, yeah, send us 10 of them." And all of a sudden, it got very corporate. And I don't think we ever liked that. I don't think we liked that at all, really. And that was a big bump, and we kind of felt a bit out of our depth. And then I knew a guy down at Winsong International, a guy called Steve Dixon, who's a fellow Scotsman.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going off to Canada to work and blah, blah, blah. I said, well, if you're not doing anything, do you want to pop around one day and just, you've got a lot of knowledge about dealing with all of these things, and we haven't, and you've worked at Pinnacle as a sales manager, you worked at Winsong as a sales manager. Do you want to pop down for a bite to eat? And to us, it just seemed that this guy had a lot of answers, and he was one of the only kind of people we knew, in that kind of league, I suppose. So he came down and we got talking, and he just kind of went, "Oh my God, I could really help you here. I could do this." And so we took him on. I took a back seat for a couple of years, and we took him on as MD. And I took a lot of money off whatever I was earning, and so did Elaine. But we felt it'd be really good for us to come to kind of bring this kind of knowledge in. And Steve really, really did. He really passed on a huge amount of knowledge about how systems worked and how we run label management, the whole process of dealing with records. And basically, this is what Pinnacle did, so this is what we would do. So I think there was a huge influence from Pinnacle on us from a very early stage, really. And then Steve went off to run Plastic in Canada, which is sadly no more after this year. He struggled with it for a while. But as I said, he put in a lot into us, and we learned an awful lot from him. And during the time that he was there, we had a really enormous thing happen to us. We were dealing with an American label called Epitaph, who were a very, very small American punk label. And they had this really, really crap punk band called The Offspring, who'd done a really bad record on their label. And then they'd made another record called Smash. And we'd gone from, I think our top seller was probably something like 1,200 units or 1,800 units. So that was just massive for us then. To selling nearly 100,000 copies of The Offspring.
Isn't that incredible?
And all of a sudden we had this record that was going ballistic. I mean, no one had really heard of Bad Religion outside of the punk scene or anything at that particular time. So they weren't. I mean, I remember going to see Virgin trying to sell them in the Bad Religion album, and they'd say, "Well, who are they?" Well, they're this really cool American punk band, and I think people would buy these records, and they just simply weren't interested. And we had the same, a very uphill struggle with The Offspring when we first got it. But it had a will of its own, this record. So it kind of started really, really to sell. I mean, and all of a sudden we were employing every unemployable person in the Wallingford area to pack boxes for us. Because all of a sudden we were dealing with, everybody wanted to deal with us. And we was literally just selling mountains of records. And because we had so many people ordering The Offspring from us, they started ordering everything else from us. So it really went ballistic. I mean, we'd gone from something like doing probably at best £50,000 a month turnover to something like £250,000, £500,000 just like that. And we were just, going, what the?
That was a huge leap.
Yeah, it was just a huge leap forward. I mean, we were literally out. I mean, there were some days, and we had a big hit in the summer. We literally were outside of our tiny warehouse taking records off of lorries and just putting them, relabeling the boxes, counting them and relabeling the boxes and just shipping them straight back out. And we had nowhere to store them. So we literally out in the street sometimes, and we would, I would be stay till sometimes 8, 9 at night, and we'd be literally outside of the building packing boxes on old doors or any benches we could get our hands on. And then because of that record, and we started to attract a lot of other labels, etc. All started to grow really, really, really rapidly. We got a warehouse next door, which was an old carpet factory, and we got a cheap deal on that as well. So we hurriedly moved into that, and at the same time as the Offspring record really took off. We got the back catalogue of a band called Green Day. We got the first 2 records, and it just happened just as we'd signed this label to do. I think we had the Green Day records in for 2 months, 2 or 3 months or something, and maybe a year, probably tops. And we'd sold something like 50 copies of each of them. They were just, a plainly bad punk band with 2 really badly recorded albums. And Dookie came out. So we sold another 100,000 of each of those. And this was kind of right at the cusp of Epitaph left us to go to Pinnacle. They'd left us because they felt they needed to go to a bigger distributor.
That must have been quite a blow for you, wasn't it?
It was horrific, actually. It was like very emotionally as well, actually, because I think we felt so let down by their decision. And we were a young company, and we'd worked very hard to deliver their success.
Yeah.
And at one time in the indie chart, out of 20 titles, we would have 10 of theirs in there. I mean, there were what everybody else had. We had Epitaph, and we were so proud of it, and everybody else was really jealous of us, and we had this really happening cool label that we'd had for a long time. And then they binned us, which was really soul destroying. I actually remember being at Medem, and I actually was in tears about it. Actually, and Tim was. We were both really upset and really let down by it. Not for the sake of them, but it was just. I had to go back to Plastic Head. I had to go back and tell everybody else they'd left.
That affects the business when you...
And we just got everybody silver discs. Everybody in the company, we'd bought everybody silver discs for the sales of it, and it was really soul destroying. It was really hard to deal with at the time.
On the other hand, that's part of running a business, isn't it? You get your ups and your downs, and you have to be able to learn to cope with the downs okay.
Well, now, with all my experience, so it'd be something that you live with, and you just say, well, it's someone's decision. Since then, we've lost labels, and we've got them back or whatever else, and it's not, but we were very young, very excited, we were happening, and it was our biggest and best thing, and everybody was jealous of us, and it was really cool, and then we were binned. And it was, it's like being a young football player. You just scored 3 goals in the World Cup final, but back on the bench. It seemed to be a hugely, and it was. I think as well as my personal pride, I felt it was very embarrassing to us. I felt very slighted by it. I think, but then again, I just thought, well, we need to recover quickly. And all of a sudden, as soon as we'd lost Epitaph, which was the most bizarrest thing, the phone rang, and we'd signed 3 or 4 really, really big labels because everybody said, well, you did such a good job with them. Hey, we'd like to come with you because we're capable. We had this new network of shops. We were dealing with everybody, basically. We'd had a hit record. We'd had the highest entry in the UK albums chart that week with The Offspring. So we had a lot to be proud about, and we'd achieved an awful lot. So we're looking back on it, it was good for us because we'd signed massive labels like Metal Blade, SST and Fat Wreck. Fat Mike phoned me up from NoFX, who was actually signed to Epitaph, and said, heard they've left. Do you want us? And it was like, yeah. So the phone actually rang, and people said, we wouldn't have actually been with you beforehand because you were just simply focused on Epitaph. But now you're not. You're a good distributor. You're young. You're energetic. So those other labels came on. So it benefited us in the long run, really.
And that's your image, isn't it? These days that you've got lots of very different labels. You're not just focused on the metal or the punk side of things.
We started off in metal and punk, and that was my background, and it was obviously Tim's background as well. And but I think and we were happy there for a while. But as years have gone on, Plastic Head has changed so much in those years. It's great. I think it's great to where we got to. But it's one thing that grated on me for years after all of that people just considered us as a specialist rock or punk distributor, and it was very difficult to say to other labels. Other labels would say, "Yeah, we know you're a good company, but don't you just do that?" And it was very frustrating, and we had to work very, very hard to get other labels, to do that. And obviously, in order to change that perception, what you need to do is you need to get hold of a good label and deliver something outside of success, deliver something outside of that, but outside of your existing genre, your established genres. But it was very difficult to get that label that had the good enough material to deliver that so we could attract in other people. So we had to work hard at that. Yeah. But therein lies the challenges in what we do. And that's, a challenge is a good thing.
Absolutely. So I know you work very hard, but what kind of things does Steve Beatty do to relax?
Do a lot of heroin. I do boxing at a good level now.
You look pretty fit to me.
I do white collar boxing, and I'm fighting soon, and I very much enjoy the challenge.
You like punching people, do you?
It's a yes. It's a really hard challenge, and it's very, very good. And a friend of mine who's a professional boxing trainer said, do you fancy, coming down the gym? And my girlfriend actually said to me about a year ago, to be honest, that you're getting a bit fat and you're very unhealthy, so you need to sort it out. So I took her advice and said, I'm not going to go down the local gym with you.
Sounds very like you. You're pretty outspoken.
Yeah, she basically said, look, you look terrible. And I said, well, I'm not going to go down the local gym with all the middle-class women and middle-aged women, and I wanted to find, if I was going to go and get fit and do something, I wanted to find something I enjoyed. So the boxing gym come up. I knew the trainer, went down, and I had no interest in boxing, to be honest, before then. And I went down and started doing the fitness thing and completely fell in love with boxing. So now I'm in there 5 nights a week. I've got a fight coming up at a good semi-professional level. So I'm at a good stage, and I'm really enjoying it. I think it's one of those things that it's if you like a challenge, and I think it's
yeah, good,
definitely. I like my football, as you well know.
You go to all the Scotland away games, don't you?
I'm a big Scotland fan, still, for my sins. But Burley's turning it around, so it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But basically music, football and boxing, really.
Yeah.
And I'm a massive military history fan, so I spend
You read a lot too, don't you?
Huge amount, yeah. Really enjoy reading.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Plastic Head is now kind of brought up for me is I'm working with a guy called Bob Carruthers, and he's setting up a military history book company and a DVD and book company. And it's we basically, the pair of us, being military history fans, and felt that all the stuff that's actually coming out now is it's all the same old stuff rehashed. There's not a lot to detail, and I think if you're a military history fan, what you want is detail, and he's really keen to do that. So it's not a joint venture as such, but we're working very closely together and that'll be through Plastic Head, and we've got a few military DVDs out at the moment. But again, it's part of the good thing of the ever expanding view that we've got at Plastic Head. I would like to have a really good military history side. I would like to do films. I'd like to do, there's a lot of stuff we would like to do, and that all of that kind of thing is beginning to come to us, which is it's an interesting period for us, I think, now, and especially with the demise of a lot of other distributors in the last couple of years. I mean, again, with Pinnacle going down, that was a massive. Just as we were kind of getting into a good, easy roll with what we were doing, another swerve ball got hit at us with the demise of Pinnacle, and we seemed to be an obvious choice for quite a few people.
Absolutely.
And it was, that's again, we're just moving into new premises and up the staffing level again, and there's some new challenges in that. So, that was. I'd say we always looked up to Pinnacle. They were always, I mean, from my mind, with Steve Mason who ran it, and the type of company they were highly admired with us. I mean, it was something we modelled ourselves on. I always liked Steve Mason, as much as I didn't know him very well, but I knew him well enough to know that I liked him. And you could always have an easy chat with him, and he's a very straightforward bloke and very easygoing. And that was a sad time for I think the industry, really. But it's been an interesting time for us since.
So Plastic Head is moving forward on many fronts, isn't it?
Yeah. Hopefully we'll be the new Pinnacle, but not the the new type of Pinnacle, I would probably like to say, rather than
Pinnacle without the bad bits.
Yeah, Pinnacle without the bad bits. Yeah,
good. Thanks, Steve, for coming in, talking to us about yourself and your history and about Plastic Head.
Thank you.
Well done what you've done so far.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for watching Cherry Red TV, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.